Today we're going to be hearing from Tracy Heverly, and she is going to be talking to us about something I'm very passionate about: leadership, operations, people, and culture. So important in the world that we're living in today and in our organization. She is been working in Pasadena for many years at Bluebeam and Space Alliance. Did I get that right? Alliance Spacesystems. And now she has hung up her own shingle with the Heverly Group. So I am excited to hear from her this morning. Welcome, Tracy, to the stage.
Thanks, Tracy. Thanks to all of you for being here on an early Friday morning. That is appreciated always. So today we're going to go on a bit of a journey together through some common inflection points that businesses often experience as they go through different growth stages. We'll talk about some progressive and proactive changes that are necessary to maintain culture at each of those stages. And my hope is that as we talk about these, not only will you maybe learn something, but you'll probably cringe a little. You might laugh, and you might give a knowing smile as you are very familiar with some of these pain points and common examples that we'll highlight. So I want to start with the foundation. We could have a whole separate meeting about culture and how do you define it. But for today's purposes, culture is really that thing that is foundational in a way that should live with a company through several growth stages. It is something that can anchor a company through transformational change. So many things happen as a business grows, and it can be overwhelming to a lot of employees. But if they know that the values that are present remain consistent through those periods, it gives them a place to really anchor and feel at peace, even if there's chaos all around them. But to be clear, even through change, culture is one of those things that, while remaining consistent in the values, the way it is applied has to look different. A company at 5 people is wildly different than a company at 50 or a company at 100. And so how you apply that culture needs to adjust along the way in order to deliver the true value of the culture. One of my favorite quotes is, "What got you here won't get you there," by Marshall Goldman. And at the heart of that is the idea that growth doesn't require more of the same. Growth really requires evolution. And if you think about that, us as humans, if something worked for us once, we want to keep doing it. It was successful for us. Why would we want to change course? And that's why it's so important to be purposeful in seeking out that evolution, those change in actions over time to maintain that culture. The goal is to anticipate what's going to be needed rather than having to suffer the consequences of actions not being taken. So let's jump in. We have those wild early days. When you're in those early years, early days, this is the key time to establish your culture. This can be talking about, most importantly, what are those core principles? What are those values that you are going to really rely on? And it needs to be purposeful. Just like you sit down and talk about your product line or your service and spend a lot of time really hashing through the details, this is the time to be very cognizant in what you want your company culture to be. It can be something that you do alone as a founder, or if you are on a small team, that it's important to have alignment in that group. And it's important to be authentic. This is not the time to turn to ChatGPT. You will probably get a beautiful list of company values that look really good. But at the end of the day, sounding good and being true to you are two wildly different things. And if you think about culture as that thing that really grounds you over the course of the business, you really need to invest time to think, what is going to remain true to you over time? What are you committed to? Because it is critical to be obsessively consistent with your values, with those core principles, They will guide your decisions in good times. More importantly, they will be supporting your decisions in bad times. When you're faced with impossible choices, if you have really strong values and core principles to lean back on, it makes those hard decisions that much easier. Another thing to recognize in those early founding days is that it's really informal, and that's both common and appropriate. People wear a lot of different hats. Many of you may have this experience where everyone in the company fits in one car. And I was once at a company that said, well, we can't all fit on one car, but for preservation of the company, we need to divide into two, because if one car's in an accident, it takes out the whole company. So you're in those really informal, but really exciting, really exhausting days. In these times, a lot happens organically. Not everything has to be written down. Oftentimes, everybody's working in one conference room, you overhear conversations, and a lot of things happen through an organic process. Despite that informality, this is not the time to compromise your values. That's why it was so important to write them down and to be cognizant of exactly what they are. Are we okay? Oh, yeah. We're gonna hold just a second and try and get this way up. If not, I'll dance while I talk.
This is the other nice thing about having the live streams. There's always 8 feet.
Yeah.
Might be slightly delayed, but we can get something on that screen.
All right. Well done. So in not compromising those values, even in the informality, we're holding each other accountable. You're holding yourself accountable, establishing those cultures now so that as you grow bigger, you're not having to go reestablish them, being true from the very, very start. The next thing I would challenge you with is assume you're going to grow. Oftentimes you're holding on by a thread in those very early days, and you're just trying to get to the next day. You're trying to get to the next dollar. But by being consistent in that culture and value in everything you do and say, you will ensure that you don't make short-sighted commitments or promises. This happens oftentimes when you are really relying heavily on those that are there with you. They're working really hard, and it's really tempting to offer them future opportunities within the company based on their commitment in that moment. But let's be honest, someone who's really good and talented in that startup phase may or may not be the right person as that company matures to keep leading the team. They may forever be a strong contributor, but how they contribute might look different over time. And so it's really important to remember this company is going to grow. Let's not make any commitments beyond what we can hold true to over time. The other thing to remember is don't tolerate bad behavior. That bad behavior is going to look different in every company. What is bad behavior within your company? Remember, culture is whatever you tolerate. You can say whatever you want, you can post whatever you want, but at the end of the day, whatever you tolerate becomes your culture. Now, some examples of what companies I've been in consider bad behavior. One company in those early days, whenever it rained, no one came to work because, it's hard to drive in the rain, which when you're 3 or 4 people, no big deal. When you're 20 people, that's a problem. So be very cognizant of those things you start to tolerate. All right, so we're growing a little bit. We're more established. We've got some teams forming, and we're still very personal, but things start to feel different. We're not in that as scrappy of days as we were in that early beginning. And this is where we tend to start to think of ourselves as a team or a family. I have never once been in a company that was small that didn't refer to themselves as family. And here's the problem with it. It consistently comes to pass that that term has to evolve later on. And when it has to evolve, it's painful because you were family. And what does family mean? Family's forever. Family is unconditional love. Family is crazy Uncle Larry at Thanksgiving saying really inappropriate things and still getting invited back the next year. What is a team? A team is when you have shared goals, you have a shared focus. Every single person is a contributor. Everyone has accountability. There's an expectation that you will support and add to and promote your company values. There is absolutely still deep bonding and investment, but this is a healthier and a more honest way to capture that strength with that small group. The other thing I will say in this time is while family is forever, teams have expectations, and one of the most important things you can do as a small company is be willing to let people go who aren't good team members. It is hard because it is very deeply bonded, but it is one of the best ways to ensure that that team continues to be as productive as possible and continue to live the values. Again, at 25 to 50 people, if you're doing this growth path quickly, hiring in-house recruiters can be invaluable. Now, yes, it matters the rate at which you're hiring. If you're hiring one person every month or two, maybe not. But if you start to hit a tick where you're trying to hire a lot of people, and a lot could even just be 3, but 3 consistently, every month or two, this is an incredible commitment, but also an incredible investment. Hiring is a science, it is an art form, and it is also a lot of administrative work. And just like every other area of the business, if you invest in an expert who knows how to do this well, you will see returns paid immediately. As well, it frees up time with your leadership team and others who had been trying to do it on their own. A talented in-house recruiter will build teams not only with the right skills, but those people who also enhance the culture. Because of that art form that they have and how they deliver, they know how to gauge candidates and bring in candidates to interview who will enhance and add to that existing culture. The other thing to consider is that it ensures a better, more consistent candidate experience. This person knows your company. This person knows what you want people to feel and what you want them to know about your company. And so the candidate walks away with a very different experience if they've worked with your in-house recruiter versus a different manager in every team or an outside recruiter that's trying to just fill a role. There are so many different feedback mechanisms now for candidates to leave their thoughts about how it went. And if they have a good experience, even if they weren't hired, it's a really nice way to promote your culture and get other candidates visibility and interest in the position. I had a board member in our early Bluebeam days. We were trying to hire like crazy and we weren't getting the traction we needed. And he said, you know what you need to do? You need to take hiring and apply it just like you would your product. You need to go market it. You need to we had a phenomenal marketing team and he's like, go make a video about your hiring and go, promote it in the same way you would anything else. And I will tell you that made a world of difference. So in-house recruiters and really putting company resources behind it is worth the investment. Onboarding is also a nice complement to hiring. If you are bringing in a lot of people quickly, investing in an onboarding process, again, will pay returns. Normally, people are desperate for that new hire to start. They go through the required HR paperwork and they quickly beeline over to their manager where it's head down, learning those new responsibilities so they can start contributing. And I would challenge you that ensuring that those people have a big picture perspective on your company, not only that big picture, but also how do each of the departments work within the company? What is their role and how does it contribute to that bigger picture? What is the product? How is it differentiated in the market? And what is the culture? What is the value? This is the perfect time to reinforce those things with someone who's just beginning. Don't make them have to experience it all before they know what they're looking for. Give it to them up front. You want them to win. You want them to hit the ground as fast as possible. And I promise you, by investing an extra day or 2 days in this process, employees will run faster and sooner, even with that day or two delay, and you will reap the benefits their entire career at the company. An example of that was a tech company where they really valued employees experiencing the product and learning the product, but they didn't teach it to them. They wanted them to kind of fumble their way through it because they felt like in that was deep learning. Well, do you know how long it takes to fumble through a product that's constantly evolving to get to the point of true knowledge? Forever. 3 months later, you're realizing, oh my gosh, can we proactively help people with this process and allow them to end with the exact same knowledge? And the answer is yes, and you'll be surprised at how little upfront effort is required compared to the return. And finally, at this stage, this is the time to start to define those policies and practices, things like travel, use of company credit card, vacation time. It's still an informal overall environment and 25 to 50 employees, but you can get a lot of questions, and I will tell you it'll actually save you time, and it will allow clear expectations, consistency across teams, and alignment with your values. Also, it's going to end some of those bad habits that develop just because people aren't sure what the policy is and it hasn't been defined. Couple good examples. An employee wanted to celebrate a team win, took their team out to lunch. $1,600 later, they were done, $1,300 of it in alcohol, and we were putting people into Ubers to make it home. That was not according to policy, but you need that policy written down so that it is clear. Another example is a company who was allowing employees to watch movies on their phone when they were doing sort of boring administrative work. And it was great when times were slow, but in fact, the company did well and they got busier. And you know what you don't want your employees doing when you're trying to be really effective? Watch movies on their phone. So by ending those bad habits early, the fewer employees that are impacted by those, the better, and just best to tackle it early. So now we're getting to the stage where you may not know everyone. This to me is a sweet spot in company growth. It's really fun. You're big enough that you're diverse. You're big enough that you're starting to get departments, but you are also still pretty familiar, and it feels special. You feel like you know what your role is and how you're contributing to this company. At this stage, though, the perception of the CEO absolutely evolves, even though they are the exact same person who founded it and was sitting in that single room with everybody else. They are held in higher esteem and put on a pedestal, and it's the nature of their relative access. Not everybody in a 100-person company is going to get one-on-one time with the CEO, and so they're just that leader on high, versus the early days when you saw them all day, every day. And so there's a different impact in every interaction. Example is the CEO riding in an elevator, talking to a developer. By the end of that, 30-second elevator ride, the developer is pretty sure he was given directives to start this new project that he's really excited about. And the CEO thinks that they just had a little chit chat. And just the power of your words, it increases exponentially as the company grows. The other thing that's hard is you are always the boss, no matter what. You may be friends with some people in the office, which is great, but it's complicated. There is no way for other employees to forget that you have significant power over their livelihood. And it is unfair for you to think that they can be in a peer relationship with you. And because of that, it is oftentimes lonely to be a CEO. But you cannot fill that void with work. You cannot fill that with work friends. It cannot be how you solve that. What you do need to do is, because those interactions are more limited, is build in purposeful exposure. This is where you, as the person who defined the culture and lives it daily, need to purposefully be out there in front of the company in ways that they can see and hear from you who knows it best. So that could be all hands. It could be town halls. If you implement an onboarding program, this is part of the onboarding is a meeting with the CEO. You bring a class of new hires together. They can join department meetings. So look for those ways to reinforce the culture, the values, the exposure to the CEO, but make it in more formal ways. The other thing, it's time to invest in manager training. One of the biggest impacts on whether or not an employee stays is their experience with their manager. Each of us in here has probably worked for someone that we would have done anything for, and we have also worked for people that made us want to choose something else. And truly, that is the person who is guiding your career. And in a small company that's grown quickly, we see the Peter principle playing out quite frequently. Someone's really good at the thing that they do. They have special skill set. We keep promoting them. We put people under them in order for them to learn those skills. But that does not necessarily mean that they naturally have the leadership skills to know how to do that well. And that's why it's really important to define and teach what it looks like to be a good manager. It's not just expertise in your area. There are a lot of deep people skills, and those skills should also be a total reflection of your culture. What are those values that you're living? Your managers need to be the ones consistently reinforcing that. If your CEO is amazing at it, but they don't experience it with that manager, your culture does not exist there. Yeah. So the Peter principle is when someone keeps getting promoted and oftentimes to the point of ineptitude. So you're really good software developer. Great, we're going to promote you to the next stage of developer. Oh, now we're going to put someone under you. And in this example, I'm speaking to times where because someone is good in their area of expertise, say software engineering, they are now leading a software engineering team. And typically that doesn't involve a lot of coding. It's more managing people, which is oftentimes not their core skill set. Maybe they have the aptitude and interest for it, but if so, we need to teach it because a lot of people don't come to it naturally. The other thing to keep in mind is that when we invest in these employees who have risen through the ranks, we're also promoting their retention. People want to stay with those who are investing in them, and we want to keep our best employees. So giving them opportunities to learn and grow is going to pay dividends. And finally, at this size, we have a need to formalize our communication, not necessarily in tone. A lot of small tech companies really value the informality in the types of language that they use. It doesn't have to be overly formal language, but we do need to be really conscious in how we apply sharing information. One of the things that comes to mind is maturing feedback loops. Typically, CEO, even HR, they'll have favorites among the company, long-timers that they go to for feedback. That's not sufficient anymore. You really need to ensure that the feedback loop is diverse and getting a reflection of what's happening across the companies. One of the ways to do that is with regular surveying. And it's not just asking about how people like their benefits and things of that nature. It's also really asking, are we living our values? Are we occurring for you the way we say we want to? What are we doing well and what are we not? The thing that's really useful with surveys, if you do a one and done, it's not nearly as helpful as if you do it on a regular cadence, because then you can compare that data and see what's happening over time. If you're growing quickly, this is especially useful. So you can see, oh, hey, we got distracted over here. And it's a way to look back. Other things are 360 reviews, skip level meetings. Really be proactive in how you solicit that feedback. Finally, regular all-hands meetings and town halls can be a really important way for companies to proactively share that information with people in a way that is authentic to the culture and a way that people aren't making up their own answers. Humans, if we aren't given answers, we make up stories in our head to answer them. And so by being proactive, we can be much more effective with our teams.
We're actually going to take Q&A at the end.
Okay.
We can mic the questions.
Sure.
That's
Okay, and a quick example of that, there was a tech company that ran on a platform, and that platform evolved to be a competitor. And that competitor dropped them, and they were given 3 days notice. They had no way to make money. They had 3 months of runway rate in order to stand up a new platform and get their customers to move to them. They held weekly all hand calls, and they didn't lose a single employee through the process. And I really attribute that to strong communication. Terrifying time, but it was an honest communication of what's going well, what still needed to be done, what the results were that they were seeing. And it's amazing what people will live with you through, but you have to trust them with that information. So in this final stage we're going to look at is you're feeling like you've made it. The company's at 100, 250, might even grow beyond that. And the thing to remember at this stage is the CEO cannot wrap his or her arms around the company in the same way they used to. It is really critical at this stage, if not before, to have built out a leadership team that includes people that are experts in their areas, well beyond what the CEO could do on his or her own. But the thing you need to do then is also give them space to execute, give them a shared vision, give them a shared mission, but you can't micromanage. And you also can't forget about it. There is something that happens when you have a leadership team that's super talented and a CEO that's overwhelmed. They tend to back off from one-on-one meetings. They tend to back off because they're so busy and these people are so talented, they're going to take care of it. No, as a CEO, you uniquely know how all these pieces have to come together, and you uniquely know what that culture needs to look at each of these departmental levels. And so that regular check-in is critical. At the end of the day, you don't want any surprises, either directions, and having trust for your team to execute, but continual feedback loops within that top organization is really critical. And there are examples I'm sure all of us have seen, either CEOs that have a really hard time letting go, they aren't checking in, that they're not happy, they let someone go, I'll just run that department. Well, you know what's happening if they're running some other department? They're not able to be the CEO. You know what they need to be? They need to be the CEO. So we really need to hire and ensure we've got a talented team that we can trust, but you've got to check in. An example where that didn't happen is really tragic. A CFO signed with a bank over a $50 million loan with very specific terms. The CFO didn't agree with those terms and so just chose not to implement the different requirements. Well, fast forward 8 months later when the bank is now checking up on all these requirements and there are millions of dollars in fines in a loan that has to be repaid. Things like that can change a company overnight. And the CEO didn't like finance. He didn't start a company because he liked finance. He was so relieved to have a CFO. It doesn't mean you don't have to check in. It doesn't mean you don't have to ask questions. You, as the CEO, still need to own how it comes together and ensure that you're not just getting nods and okays, but really digging in and understanding that things are culturally aligned and that people are making progress as expected.
Take like two more and then we'll do Q&A.
Perfect. We'll quickly jump through the last few. In-house counsel, it's not as expensive as you might guess, especially compared to hourly rates. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. You would be amazed at what will be possible when you have that insight of an in-house counsel early in the process. The guidance on risk mitigation, though, is what I think is most important. In-house counsel understands your culture. It understands your values. It understands your objectives in each of your issues that you're bringing forward with them. And a great example is with terminations. There is risk in every termination to some extent. Is it still the right thing? Usually. And a lot of times company put it off. But if you have the reassurance of an in-house counsel, it gives you a lot more confidence to move forward and to know, okay, this is our exposure, but this is why this is the right thing, and this is how we handle it well. Finally, invest in employee engagement, especially at this size. It's easier to feel disconnected in a larger company. You don't know everyone. And it's easy to do it in a way that's a win-win. You can have combination training and bonding events. You can leverage the talent and uniqueness of your diverse team. Having teams teach other departments what they do, people love that. And there is so much value in understanding more deeply what are the pain points of that other department, because oftentimes there's crossover and you start to become a better teammate to them when you understand more. You can also do fun things. Do you have a bunch of people that love Dungeons and Dragons? You know, what about lunch and learns for talents people have out of office? There are ways to bring people together under shared interests that aren't expensive, but really do help promote that bonding. And then finally, promote your culture and values with those chosen activities, because they really will be a place for you to showcase them in fun ways. There's a company who gives 2 days off a year for employees to do volunteer work. And one of the things that they sponsored was a Habitat for Humanities build. So it's a construction company. Giving back is a big part of their culture. And so there are ways to promote both the culture and team bonding. Generic notes, as we said before, CEOs need outside perspective. That can be their family, it can be their friends, it could be outside mentors. But I challenge you, if you are a CEO, to find those, because you will need them, because it is lonely. And again, you can't solve that internally. A note that largely remote companies, or those with multiple offices, often need different pacing with some of these things, like with communication and engagement. And CEOs and exits. There are not many founder CEOs whose DNA work well when we're reporting to someone else. That's not why they started a company. And frequently you'll see, oh, it's okay, I love the new owner, it's going to be great. There's a culture change that often needs to happen with change in ownership. And the CEO who established that original culture has a lot of heartache, all of a sudden seeing that baby of theirs change hands and live in a different culture. And so my advice is to end on the high note, go start that new company, and not live through the pain. So celebrate your well-earned wins. Be protective of your culture as that common thread through stages of growth, and be proactive by seeing what is needed next. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tracy. Great reminders across the board for all sizes of companies. We're so appreciative of you sharing that. We are going to do Q&A. We like our questions short and sweet. So make sure there's a sentence with a question mark at the end, short one. And also, you'll be sticking around after. So if you have stories or other things you'd love to talk to her about, that will be the occasion to do it. With that, I'm going to turn it over to John, and we're going to do some Q&A.
All right, let's start over here because I saw you raise your hand earlier.
Tracy, when you went back to the surveying marks, some organizations claim they over-survey their employees, and employees are done with it. Pulse surveys, engagement surveys, things like that. How do you address that aspect of it when you're trying to get the pulse and trying to get the buy-in, but you don't get much response, and there's sort of fatigue when it comes to that?
I think fatigue comes when employees feel like they're giving a lot of feedback and don't see what it does. If we don't see action from our feedback, it feels like it goes into a black box. We're not motivated to keep doing it. I think the things that are most critical are, as you receive that survey feedback, one, sharing it with the company so people can see. And sometimes that's motivational because they're like, oh, I agree or don't agree. It kind of like get your vote in. I also think that if you are seeing things that are appropriate to address in those surveys, you need to do so. And sometimes it takes time to address what is showing, but talking about it, addressing it, acknowledging it goes a long way. And if you then say, you know, we're going to continue to survey because we want to see our progress. Are the things we're doing making a difference? There probably is too much surveying, and there are ways to consolidate so that you don't have, you know, HR running certain surveys and leadership running certain surveys. It's like, be thoughtful in what's going to be most impactful. But I think the fatigue comes in people feeling like it doesn't make a difference. So I would focus there.
Next question, back here.
Hi, Tracy. Thanks for the presentation. I'm curious about small companies, the up to 50 employees. And you talked about fractional HR. On such small companies, they tend to have a lack of funding. How can you quantify the value so that it shows up well in the P&L for a very small company of bringing in an in-house recruiter fractionally or otherwise?
It probably depends on how you're currently hiring and how fast you're hiring. So 50 employees, let's say, if your rate of growth, if you're using outside recruiters, not in-house, you're probably paying a hefty fee. And oftentimes those recruiters, you know, are charging 15 to 20%, maybe more, for whatever the rate of the hire is. That adds up really fast. And while there's an overhead expense to in-house recruitment, you will find that you will hire faster. It'll be less draw on your time, so you may have to hire fewer technical people because they're not spending 50% of their time trying to hire for their team, and being able to look at what you would have spent with outside recruitment dollars. People will breathe a sigh of relief when you have somebody who is talented running that process. It will allow efficiency within the other teams. So in a black and white way, look at what you're paying outside recruiters. Probably only takes a few hires to get you there. And then look at the ancillary benefit of retention, hiring the right people. Hiring the wrong people is probably one of the most expensive things that a company does. And so some of them are soft costs, if you will, harder to quantify, but I'd start with outside recruitment.
Anybody else have a question?
John.
Thank you, Tracy, for a great presentation. Kelly Nardoni, nice to meet you. What are some podcasts, books, resources you turn to stay sharp in this field and for new ideas, just towards maintaining that growth mindset?
There's so many. I recently started listening to audiobooks, you know, while you're emptying the dishwasher or doing laundry, those things that are kind of mindless. And I also have worked places where, you know, the CEO read a book a weekend and you can get kind of fatigued because there's so many great ideas. So I would say there's an organization called Chief, which is a women leadership organization that I find has really interesting both podcasts and just newsletters. I also think HBR is fantastic. It's consistently good. They also offer amazing like actual training for leadership and things like that across the company. It's a little overwhelming because there's so many. I'd be happy to send out, I have a number of books that I've loved, but I think it's really dependent on the culture that you're looking to establish and the type of company that you're running. But I'd be happy to put together kind of a list.
Good question up front.
Thanks, Tracy. My name's Jonathan. I'm curious. I used to work for a small business where the boss said that as she viewed me as like her son, so that family culture sometimes, and she treated me like I abandoned her when I left. Yes. So how do you maintain the family culture or that type of vibe that you want while also making it a professional environment? Yeah, that's why I think language is so important, because it is so personal with family. And I think the concept of team is that, you know, we have to create an environment that makes an employee want to stay. And we also have to, as an employee, bring our best to work every day. And I think talking about those things in our reviews, in our values, it needs to be part of how we live and breathe. Exiting people, terminating people in those early days,
I mean, people can hardly stomach it because it's so personal, because it's like, well, that's the person we go to lunch with. That's the person, or people leave for the next opportunity. And I think we just have to, in the culture, talk about the fact that we are humans that care about each other. And in that, we want what is best for every person. And sometimes when you're in a company where you're swimming upstream, is how I like to, it's just hard. What you're doing is not what they are looking for, and there's constantly feedback that you're not giving what is needed. It is most fair and compassionate to let that person go find a place where they are swimming with the stream. And likewise, it is hard to lose a great employee, but if you really care about that person and want them to be successful in life, you have to respect that decision. And you create a stronger team by seeing how you treat other people in those experiences. So in your example, if you left and they said, we are heartbroken to lose you, but we are so excited for you to get to go pursue that next thing. I think that reinforces a culture where people will want to stay. And if you've always been honest about it being a team, it's one where there's choice in both directions. It's one where you try to do everything you can to earn the right to stay on both sides. But it's one where at the end of the day, not any one person is going to make or break a company, and therefore we want what is best for each person.
I've got a question for you, and this one might be something that might take a little while to explain, so don't last. So you did a really good job of talking about how to scale companies, from a startup to an early stage, building the company to 100, 200 employees, corporate culture, things like that. A lot of companies here in Pasadena aren't like that, and their exit strategy eventually is they get acquired. Bluebeam went through that, and not only did Bluebeam get acquired, but they got acquired by a foreign company. So, and I'm not sure if you would live through all of that, but if you can talk a little bit about what went well, what went, not so well in that kind of a transition, because I think a lot of people that are working for smaller companies in Pasadena may be facing that situation.
Yeah, absolutely. It was amazing learning experience. We were acquired by a company called Nemetschek, which is a German company. And they are unique in that they were, at least at the time, a holding company. So they really enabled each of their companies to run independently. And so we were in a position where we were able to continue to execute as an independent company as part of something much bigger. So in some ways, we were able to maintain a lot of the culture that had made us successful. They bought us because we were growing. They bought us because we were winning, and they didn't want to mess that up. And oftentimes, too, in an acquisition, you have what's called an earn-out period, where they're seeing if they're going to pay top dollar for you based on your earnings over that period. And usually in that period, they can't mess with how you do things because it might impact your ability to earn money and hit that goal. So we had a couple of years where they really were pretty hands-off. By definition, they had to be. On the other side of that 2-year period, the biggest changes are revenue. As an independent business, we were all about growth. We were revenue top line. All of a sudden, we're part of a public company that has to give quarterly reports. They want predictability. They want growth of not only the top line, but also your profitability. And they're looking for any ways to promote efficiency. And those had not been part of our DNA. And they were fun, interesting ways to learn, grow, evolve, but they were significantly different. And it absolutely took time to realize, hey, sometimes in public companies, looking at quarterly returns, you have to do some short-term things that may not be at all what you think are going to serve you longer term, but it's required. And that's where you start, the rubber hits the road in new ways. There's just different requirements in existing. It also is where being able to communicate well back is so important. If you can really sell the company on why something is good for them long-term and describe it in ways that the market can also understand and translate. Like, for example, when you're transitioning to a SaaS model, it's expensive. you have to go through a big bump. Markets understand that. They'll invest in that. But, you know, if you want to invest in something else wildly different, you've got to be able to really tell the story to know how it's going to evolve. So it was both really fun and exciting. It was really painful. I would say we had a bit of a buffer those first 2 years.